Well, good morning and welcome to EU Clusters Talks, where clusters and companies and policymakers come together to share best practice and discuss how clusters can contribute to strengthening Europe's industrial ecosystems. My name is Karen Clements and I'll be your moderator today for our session dedicated to the Industrial Accelerator Act. And today's topic is actually particularly timely. Europe's competitiveness and strategic autonomy increasingly depend on our ability to scale up strategic manufacturing capacity to accelerate industrial decarbonisation and strengthen value chains. And the proposed Industrial Accelerator Act is designed to support those very ambitions. So today, we'll explore what the Act could mean in practice for clusters, for companies, for innovation ecosystems, and how it might help accelerate industrial transformation across Europe. And to do that, we are joined happily by Imavera Sardone, Policy Officer at DG Grow, who will present the key elements of the Act for us, by our panel of representatives from sectors very affected by the Act, and with Nina Hopman topping and tailing with the usual news and funding opportunities. But before I hand over to Nina, some housekeeping rules. So we will be using Slido so that we can get the temperature of the room, and the usual QR code will be displayed on screen for you to scan. Now, if you'd like to submit a question to the panel, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And if you'd like to post a comment, please use the chat also at the bottom of your screen. And if you'd like to speak, then just raise your hand and we will enable your mic and your camera. Remember that the session is being recorded and it will be available on the platform after the event. So with that out of the way, I will now hand over to Nina for the all-important news from the ECCP. Nina.
Many thanks, Karen, and good morning to everyone. We are happy to have you here in the session with us today. And to start off, we invite you to contribute to the public consultation on the draft of the new general block exemption regulation. The draft is open to be commented until the 23rd of April. So please have a look at this important public consultation. The new GBER will involve less administrative burden, will be easier to interpret and apply, and it will also be adapted to recent social, market, and technology development, and should also allow for greater flexibility in the design of aid measures. So please have a look at this public consultation, as said, open to be commented until the 23rd of April. The link is in the chat, so you can go directly to the consultation. In case you have not seen it yet, on the 22nd and 23rd of April, there will be the EU-Ukraine Business Summit taking place in Brussels. The European Business Summit, the European Commission, together with the governments of Ukraine and Poland, invite you to this important event to bring together policymakers, businesses, and financial institutions for 2 days of discussions, roundtables, but also matchmaking, as well as pitching sessions and workshops to discuss Ukraine's defense and European strategic industries, critical raw materials, public-private partnerships, business environment reforms, support for SMEs, investments in the energy sector, and so on. So many topics on the agenda. You can register for taking part in the EU-Ukraine Business Summit and also for the B2B matchmaking that is happening online prior and during the event. Both links will be in the chat, so have a look at the Business Summit and the B2B matchmaking space as well. The Euro clusters are in full speed working, especially also on the open calls that they have prepared or are preparing for SMEs, to give them financial support to foster innovation, the uptake of advanced technologies, but also to build capacities in strategic sectors and to drive Europe's transformation towards a sustainable, digital, and resilient economy. There are 16 Euro clusters that started in the past year and that are now launching the calls. So we invite you to have a look at past EU clusters talks, of course, to understand what these individual Euroclusters are doing, but also to keep an eye out for any open calls that might be of interest for the SMEs in your sectors, because in total over 30 million of euros will be channeled directly to SMEs through the open calls from the Euroclusters. So the recordings and slides of the past EU cluster talks are available so that you can get an overview of the individual Euroclusters, and the calls will then be published on the EU funding tenders portal and the European Cluster Collaboration Plan. And last but not least, in case you have not done it yet, have a look at the ECCP summary report 2025, an important report that looks at how clusters can advance in three priority areas that the competitiveness compass sets out. One is closing the innovation gap, another one decarbonizing with competitiveness by enabling collective actions, and reducing excessive dependencies and increasing security by supporting value chain diversification. The report is available on the ECCP library, and we put the link in the chat that guides you directly to it. And with that, I hand over back to you so that we can, Karen, so that we can get started with the topic of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nina. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Imavera Sardone to give us an introduction to the Industrial Accelerator Act. Imavera.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me and see me well. Thank you very much for inviting me today to this session. So my name is Imavera Sardone. Good morning from Brussels. I'm based. I work for the European Commission in the Directorate General of Industry Enterprise (DG GROW), where I work in the unit on energy-intensive industries and raw materials. And I'm here today I have the pleasure to present you a very important milestone that we have reached last week, and that was the adoption of the so-called Industrial Accelerator Act, which I have coordinated as an initiative together with our team involving a lot of people in DG GROW. Last week, indeed, the Commission adopted the long-awaited proposal for a regulation for an Industrial Accelerator Act. Maybe we can go to the next slide, please. So first of all, what is the Industrial Accelerator Act, and why the Commission has presented such initiatives? So as I mentioned, it's a proposal for a regulation whose objective is indeed to strengthen European industrial base by boosting manufacturing, growing business, and creating jobs in the EU. It is a proposal that delivers on the recommendation of the Draghi report on competitiveness, as well as the political guidelines of the Commission, as well as also as part of the key initiatives of the mission letter of our EVP, Stéphane Séjourné. Why there was a need to develop this new, let's say, proposal for a regulation. This is really something that should be an horizontal framework to strengthen the industrial base. Why? Because what we have, let's say, analyzed as part of our analysis impact assessment is that we live in a context where Euro is increasingly becoming dependent and its industrial production is declining. Just to give a few figures, as you can see on the left-hand side of this slide, the share of manufacturing and as total GDP has declined a lot in the last decades and more. Now we are at about 14%, so share of manufacturing as a share of total GDP declining, but also other indicators show that there is a decline in industrial production. Since 2019, the volumes produced by the energy-intensive industries in particularly have declined by almost 20%. And similarly, our dependency on countries like China for a certain strategic sector has increased. For instance, for EVs, increased by a factor of 4.2 compared to conventional cars. And also when we look at key clean technology or net zero technologies, which are fundamental for the transition, such as batteries or solar panel, we talk about now 50% of the battery used today in Europe and more are imported from China. And when we look at solar panel, the situation is even worse. Our dependency from China can reach up 90%. So based on this, let's say, context, the objective, the ambition that the Act aims to achieve is to, as an overall goal, increase the share of manufacturing as EU GDP to 20% by 2035. How we will do this, we will go into the detail in a second, but indeed the objective, the purpose is to strengthen the manufacturing industry, at the same time ensuring the economic resilience, prosperity, and strategic autonomy. And we will do this mainly by boosting demand for European low carbon industrial product and clean technologies. So we will intervene on the demand side of these technologies, but also to accelerate, let's say, and encourage investment in decarbonisation by streamlining, accelerating permitting procedure to facilitate that investment take place, especially in so-called cluster. So by doing so, we hope to create a lead market for those that we define as clean and strategically important technologies and sectors. We can move to the next slide to enter a bit more into the detail of the act, of the regulation. So indeed, how we plan to do this. There are four main pillars. I'll try here today to give you really an helicopter view of what is a, let's say, complex proposal. Complex in the sense that it touches upon different areas and has different level of intervention. But I'll try to summarize according to the four main chapter of the Act. So first and foremost, how we will do this? We will do this via permitting. We will introduce, we have introduced concept like the single digital access point through the European Business Wallet, and also the one project, one submission for the permit granting procedure of industrial manufacturing project. Then, a very important innovative part of the Act is the creation of EU lead market. What does it mean? That means that we will and make sure that public procurement, public support, and incentive schemes are addressed to boost demand for certain industrial product, clean tech, and also automotive. Finally, the last two important chapters, the industrial acceleration areas, which we also see, let's say, on the supply side, on the sense of supporting investment, deployment of technologies on the ground, and via the creation of these acceleration areas, which are indeed cluster-shaped area, there will be facilitation for business to invest in clean industrial manufacturing. And last but not the least, we tackle a large foreign direct investment, because we want to make sure that via introducing some conditionality for a limited number of very strategic investment, we, let's say, add value to the EU internal market. Now, let's dive in a bit more in each of the pillar. Maybe we can move to the next slide, please. Yes, indeed. Thank you. So indeed, the first part is about permitting. Based on feedback received in consultation with industries at various levels, the permitting procedure to set up a new business activity, especially when it relates to an industrial manufacturing, being large or small, but when it concerns like innovative technologies to take place, still represent a bottleneck. This is also a very diversified situation depending on the member states. I know here today we have representatives, colleagues from all across Europe, so that's very good. So let's say the situation is different, but for one sure we want to make sure that at least at European levels there are certain rules that apply to everyone that wants to invest in industrial manufacturing. So the objective is really to streamline, and in a way we call it together, or the low-hanging fruit of digitalization, because there are a lot of opportunities there that are not really fully, let's say, tapped. And with the first provision of the Act for permitting, we really want to ensure that permitting process and procedures are fully digitalized. So the authorities have to ensure that everything can be done digital. We have introduced this concept of the European Business Wallet. What is the Business Wallet? It's a secure, digital, and interoperable application for companies to manage, share, and sign documents like licenses, certificate, and this all across member states. In this way, by fully digitalizing the permitting procedure, we should help in particularly the smaller companies that often, let's say, lack the resources compared to large companies to deal with compliance tasks and to reduce the turnover spent on compliance tasks. Similarly, we talk about one project, one submission. It doesn't mean that there will be, let's say, only one single procedure, but the authorities have to make sure that these are bundled all together so that there is only, let's say, one procedure ongoing where the project promoter can interact with the relevant authorities. So this is just in terms of scope, because it's mentioned indeed in the slide. This is the most, let's say, horizontal type of provision that we have in the Act, because it applies to all the industrial manufacturing sector. This is a definition which is part of the NACE C category. So we really cover all sorts of business, not only related to this decarbonisation or like big heavy industry, but also, I don't know, a small factory, that whatever is manufacturing, considered manufacturing sector. There is only one sector here that we exclude, which is tobacco. Then moving to the subset of provision, we have a more focused set of permitting facilitation for energy intensive industries, whereby here indeed we align with the provision that we have already introduced in the context of the Net Zero Industry Act for clean technologies. So that's why we have a full alignment with the Net Zero Industry Act. When it comes to the single point of contact, the timelines, this is from 12 to 18 months. We have also introduced some tacit approval for certain, let's say, step of the permitting procedure to provide, let's say, speed, to accelerate and provide certainty to the project. Also, we have introduced consideration of public interest. So this is, we wanted to create a level playing field, because the Net Zero Industry Act covers innovative technologies, clean energy technologies, but also industrial transformation technologies. And here we want to extend this to all energy intensive industries, regardless of whether they, let's say, are part of the clean tech value chain or not. The purpose of this measure is to provide indeed more clarity, predictability for investors, and reducing as much as possible administrative delays by ensuring a transparent and fully trackable process, so that the investment risk is, let's say, lowered. Let's move to the next one. Yeah, this is the so-called creation of the industrial manufacturing acceleration areas, which is an innovative, let's say, instrument, although I'm sure that for many here around the virtual table, it can resonate as familiar, because indeed we want to elevate in a way the concept of cluster to something that is enshrined into law. And the purpose for this acceleration area is to create go-to industrial areas with different benefit to attract investment. I would say here the sectors covers are the strategic sectors, which we define in the Annex 1 of the proposal. I can summarize them in three main categories. So energy intensive industries like steel, metal, cement, ceramics, paper, glass. Net zero technologies, so solar panels, wind turbine, batteries, and all the other sectors covered by the also Net Zero Industry Act, and automotive value chain and component of the automotive value chain. These are those sectors that we consider strategic according to Annex 1. At the same time, when it comes to the areas, we really encourage member states to look broadly and industrial manufacturing. So we say the bare minimum should be the strategic sector, but you can also go beyond. And we ask member state to designate, we have a shall, so it's not a may or like voluntary, but they shall designate at least one industrial manufacturing acceleration areas on their territory to encourage the creation of strategic clusters. In particularly, in these clusters, member states should facilitate financing of project. We don't say them exactly what to finance, how to finance, because this is beyond what the Commission can do, but indeed they should make sure that there is a coordination and there is a facilitation for an investment to take place, taking into account, we explicitly say this, taking into account the participation in the cluster of small and medium enterprise and small mid caps. What does it mean concretely? That the project located in the clusters, in the areas, will benefit for faster permitting, improved coordination, and better access to infrastructure, financing, and skills. For example, one prerequisite for an investment to take place is the energy infrastructure. So here we are asking that the energy needs of an acceleration areas should be taken into account as in a way priority, or to feed into the relevant transmission system operator, to make sure that this project will have the connection to the energy infrastructure. This is also an important element of novelty, because indeed the access to energy represents still an important and relevant bottlenecks. Regarding permitting, when we talk about a more efficient process, this is about once again possibility to have tacit approval for certain intermediate step of the process. But most important, we have introduced an aggregated baseline permit, which means that everything that is not planned, or let's say project specific, so for instance those permits related to the infrastructure, the transport needs, the things that are related to the location, they are let's say provided in advance, aggregated and provided in advance. This is something, for instance, the aggregated permit baseline, that it's a novelty compared to the Net Zero Industry Act valid, for instance. That it means that whatever can be aggregated should be done before. However, the things that are project specific, for instance, the individual environmental impact assessment, those remain, let's say that the remain in charge of the specific project, cannot be done upfront, let's say. And then again, in terms of skills, this acceleration area shall benefit for increased synergies with the advantages provided under the so-called Pact for Skills, with particular attention to large-scale skills partnership or regional skill partnership. So we're moving on to the next chapter of the Act, please. So lead market, this is indeed the chapter about the creation of demand, is also the chapter where we introduce the concept of made in Europe. This act has been a lot portrayed in the press as the US introduced the made in Europe. Indeed, it's about it. What are lead market measure for low carbon and European product? So the concept of made in Europe, or like European preference, means that whenever public money is used, and when we say public money is used, we refer to this public instrument. So via public procurement, public auction for clean energy technologies, or support scheme, incentive schemes to let's say consumers. Whenever so public money is used in this way, in certain selected strategic sectors, which are, as you can see in the blue bar, steel, cement, aluminium, the net zero technologies, and the vehicle component. So for this strategic sector, the proposal introduces some targeted provision for direct support to manufacturing. So it means that the materials like steel, aluminum, cement, or the net zero technologies that benefit from this public support should include some made in Europe consideration or requirement and low carbon. In public procurement, when we talk about made in Europe, here it's indeed the so-called concept of geographical scope. It means that when we say that a material or a product should originate from Europe, it means it should come from the EU, but also we recognize that company and products coming from partners that are, let's say, trusted partners, meaning partners or countries with whom we have in place international commitment. So, for instance, the countries of the EEA, European Economic Area, Norway, Iceland, but also the countries with whom we have signed free trade agreements, Canada, for instance, or the countries that are part of the customs union or the government procurement agreement, under certain circumstances, they shall be considered of European origin. So this means that if they have opened their market to our products, then we shall open our market to their product. If this situation does not exist, for instance, there are certain countries with whom we do not have international agreement, international commitment, such as China, for instance, that is by default excluded. So this is the big, let's say, introduction of this made in Europe concept. We design it in this way to make sure that it is compatible with international trade law. So it means that it's a reciprocity logic. So if there is reciprocity, then we allow these products to bid in a public tender. Means reciprocity that if they allow us to participate in their public tender. If there is no reciprocity, then these products can be considered not of European origin. This applies to indeed all the sectors in scope. When it comes to the low carbon at the same times, I know an important thing perhaps I must mention here when it comes to the made in Europe origin. This is the starting point. At the same time, we say that the Commission, based on duly justified situation, for instance, to ensure security of supply, to avoid dependency, increase of dependency. So where there are, or for environmental reason, the EU can decide to exclude certain countries that, let's say, are part of our international agreement, but for which we decide, let's say, to close the market and not grant this made in Europe possibility. This is also important to mention that precisely this concerns only when public money is involved, precisely to charge the public money for European production, but also to a limited share. For instance, when we we focus here on when I say measures, what does the measure look like when it comes to steel, cement, aluminium, for instance? So we say that it should be low carbon and also made in Europe. Low carbon is precisely because we want to make sure that decarbonisation investment take place in Europe, and we preserve this low carbon investment within our territory by having a made in Europe, let's say, clause. So if you want to access, let's say, public participate bid in a public procurement and use European cement, 5%, because we have a target of 5% to start with, authorities shall ensure that it comes from Europe and is low carbon. So you see, it's a very targeted way to start creating lead market for the most innovative, the most, let's say, low carbon technologies. Likewise, we have similar conditions that are tailor-made to the specific net zero technologies. Here you see, for instance, in the slide, the clean tech or net zero technologies we are covering. So solar panel, battery for energy storage system, EV batteries, wind, heat pumps, nuclear and electrolyzers. Let's move maybe to the next slide, where I can show you how the provision of Made in Europe, MIU as the abbreviation, for the net zero technologies apply. So here the intervention is indeed about the instrument such as public procurement, public support scheme, auction for renewable energy, but also support to manufacturing. So for each of these six clean technologies, you see what sort of so in which condition, not conditions, requirement will have to be satisfied by authorities when it comes to public procurement or support scheme or auction or manufacturing. If I take, for instance, the example of solar manufacturers, solar PV, solar panels, which is a technologies that we want to ramp up in Europe, the provisions say that at entry into force, which is EIF, at entry into force, 3 years after entry into force, this is to give the time to authorities, but business manufacturing in particular, to scale up their production, inverter plus cells or equivalent have to originate in Europe or in the partner countries. This is a rule that is relevant for public procurement, support scheme, and auction. If you see, for instance, for batteries, we have differentiated, let's say, provision. First, final product and for project bigger than 1 MWh, then it's the final product has to be originating in Europe. Whereas 3 years after entry into force, it's also the battery materials and the cells and one component. So we want to give the time to industry to ramp up and to create a demand. So the purpose of this Made in Europe is indeed to make sure, in a nutshell, that if a company has to do an investment, there is a number of risks to take, but via this provision, he will have secure demand, guaranteed demand, because indeed there are the requirements. So authorities, or in order to access incentives, this manufacturing or this component should be sourced, this product should be sourced from Europe. So by having secure demand, you lower the risk of your investment, and let's say you also over time scale down, lower the cost by reducing overall the interest, or let's say the benefit for the entire Europe is to reduce dependency on external players, partners, let's put it this way. Moving on to the next slide. I'm approaching the end of my presentation. So the last, let's say, chapter of the Act is the so-called foreign investment condition. Here we talk about, is also here, is very targeted provision, large, very large foreign investment, so over 100 million euro. We want them to access the internal market, but to make sure that they create values on the territory. So we ask for the large investment above 100 million in sectors, in narrow specific sectors, precisely investment in sectors such as batteries, EVs, electric vehicles, solar panels, and critical raw materials processing and recycling. So large investment in these sectors, but also where the investors come from dominant countries, so countries which own 40% of the global capacity of this technology or of these sectors, like for instance, take batteries. We want them to basically be able to proceed with investment to the extent they fulfill certain conditions. We say 4 out of 6 conditions need to be met. The most interesting condition, which is a mandatory one, is linked to employment. So this to ensure that quality jobs are created in Europe, we say that this investment must ensure that minimum 50% of the employer should come from the union, from the EU workforce across all level of workforce, including managers, white collar, blue collars. And this should, in a way, really have positive spillover on the territory to ensure that all sort of, let's say, ecosystems around SMEs and so on have access to job opportunities in this large investment. Then we have conditions related to technologies transfer for innovation that should be created on the territory, on the where the investment is taking place. Then we have a third conditions which relate to ownership, so to limit the foreign capital participation to 49% ownership. Similarly, we have some condition related to cooperation and control. So in case of joint venture, a majority share should be with European entities. Then we have condition related to research and innovation spillover. So 1% gross annual global revenue should be spent in the EU for research and development activities, and also sourcing strategy. So we ask these investors to source 30% of the component that they will need to use in their like large investment within the European value chain. So to local, let's say, to source locally their components, once again to create positive spillover on the territory. So this is about, indeed, purpose is to create higher added value to the internal market. to enhance the local value chain for these strategic sectors, to these specific strategic sectors, and make sure that territories, including the smaller companies, may benefit for this large foreign investment. As I mentioned, this is really targeted to few large ones and in specific areas. The enforcement stays with the member state, but there will be some oversight, like the Commission can take control or can take over certain cases when they are particularly sensitive or high investment values. With this, I think I conclude the last slide. Let's move to the, I think, conclusion. Yeah, I think that so far, I mean, this was, sorry if it took a bit longer, but let's say the four main pillar of the act in this slide is just a snapshot to show. I mentioned that in a way we are targeted in the measures we are doing. At the same time, we are covering for sectors that are present all across Europe. As you can see here, this map just shows the location where in Europe energy intensive production is located, net zero technologies production manufacturing is located, and where automotive components are located. Is to show that this proposal can really benefit across Europe, all member states, north side is north to south and east to west. So let me conclude by saying thank you very much for this attention. With this initiative, we like to say that this is a bit an evolution in industrial policy thinking, especially by introducing for the first time ever the concept of made in Europe. We hope that let's say the Parliament and Council, which are now tasked with negotiating the proposal and making it actually a law, will share the same level of ambition. And yeah, we believe that in the current global context, geopolitical context, Europe should do more to strengthen, we should do more to strengthen our industrial base, not only as an economic objective, but really to preserve the stability and the prosperity for our continent. Thank you so much for your attention. And I hand over to Karen, I think.
Yes, thank you so much, Imavera, for that very comprehensive oversight of what is a very, very ambitious act. And I think that everyone listening to you today is particularly interested in the industrial acceleration areas and the potential opportunities with those. We've had many questions. I know you can't stay right to the end of the discussion. You've answered one of them already, which was about the fact that this now will be debated by Council and Parliament. So there's a long road ahead still. But maybe if we have time, you may be able to answer a few questions after the panel discussion. If not, I can reassure everyone who's sent questions that we will answer them one way or another in due course. So now let's go to Slido so we can hear what you think here about what your reactions are to the Industrial Accelerator Act. And as usual, you can either join at slido.com using the hashtag there, or you can use your phone to scan the Q&A, the QR code, I think that's what they're called. So the first question is, which objective of the Industrial Accelerator Act do you consider most important? Strengthening EU industrial competitiveness, strengthening strategic autonomy, accelerating innovation and technology deployment, supporting SMEs and scale-ups, reducing regulatory barriers, or another? So far we have strategic autonomy in the lead, being caught up quite quickly by industrial competitiveness. And those two are definitely the most important objectives that this Act seeks to, from your perspective, that this Act seeks to address. Okay. But maybe not so much on reducing regulatory barriers. Well, maybe we'll have to delve into it and see what the Parliament and the Council will do about that. Okay, thank you very much. Oh no, we're still voting, right? I think we have it though. I think strategic autonomy and it is a particularly pressing concern at the moment. So our next question is, which objective, sorry, the second question is, what do SMEs need most to scale? This is very much from your perspective. Yes, there we go. Money is always a core issue, and their access to it. And I don't think that changes that's changed over our lifetimes. So funding, finance, access to finance is coming up absolutely as your most pressing need for SMEs in order to grow. And the Act, certainly, from what Imavera has told us, is going to hopefully not only attract more investment, but make access to funding easier. Okay, so simplification, yes, skills, access to finance, here we go again. Okay, well, I think it's very clear that, that funding is what SMEs need in order to scale. Thank you so much for that. Right, our third and final question. What idea from the presentation and the Industrial Accelerator Act resonates most with you? Nuclear. Certainly the energetic potential. And the origin principle is coming out here as the most, what struck you all most forcefully from Imavera's presentation and from the Act, if you've looked at it in detail. And yes, here we have also a look at the different sectors that will be most impacted by the Act. Fascinating. Well, it certainly made the headlines for many weeks before the Act was actually published. So it makes sense that Made in Europe is what's really struck everyone, and which is extremely ambitious and obviously a game changer potentially for the European Union. Okay, thank you so much, all of you. It's lovely to get your input. Right, now we'll go to our panel. We have with us today representatives from our community who are working in those sectors that are going to be most impacted and that the IAA is designed to boost. I'm very pleased to welcome Fabrizio Guarazzi, Innovation Manager at Lombardy Energy Cleantech Cluster, Hugo Durand, Territorial Relations Officer at Cleantech Valley, but also with EDF, and Tobias Lechtenfeld, Executive Director at Tech for Net Zero. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Before we jump in to the nitty-gritty of the IAA, can I ask you all to introduce yourselves briefly, your organisations, and perhaps one of your key priorities at the moment, starting with Fabrizio. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Fabrizio Guarrazzi from the Lombardy Energy Cleantech Cluster. We are the energy cluster for cleantech and environment at Lombardy level, so Milan-based. Our ecosystem is composed by 150 members from, of course, large enterprises, SMEs, startups. I mean, it's a cluster ecosystem. We deal with the cleantech sector and all the topics that are strategic for the Lombardy region. I would say that, of course, as all the clusters, we promote the innovation through different pillars, and we have different key areas at the cluster level. But I would say that hydrogen, circular economy, industrial symbiosis, power to X are quite strategic for the clusters. Karen, you're mute, so we cannot hear you.
Classic. Thank you, Fabrizio. Hugo, over to you.
Hugo, you're mute as well.
Thank you, dear colleagues. Hello, everyone. Well, today I'm representing the Clean Tech Valley cluster and also EDF, more especially the nuclear industry, because I'm representing the nuclear power plant facility of Tricastin. Um, well, the Clean Tech Valley is a cluster which is developing the clean technology industry to support the ecological transition, mostly in the GAR region, but we are looking at an expansion throughout the entire French territory. So this is quite a first for us to participate in such an event, which is a great honor. And sincerely, I thank every person responsible for the organization of this event. So the Clean Tech Valley was created through a collaborative approach between private and public stakeholders, which was some kind of a first in France. Its founders are EDF, of course, but also different communities of municipalities and big actors like Enedis, BRL, Orano, some banks, and the Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the Research Facility Center of CE. It was mandatory for me to quote everyone. So our ecosystem strives to set the standard for green innovation, aiming to make the clean tech valley some kind of a benchmark in the field. So our top priority here is to connect the dots on how we could help our future candidates for our acceleration cluster to benefit from the evolution of all the regulation in Europe. And as everyone seems to have mentioned it throughout the polls, how do we access new ways to finance strategic in an innovative approach and industrial new implementations?
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Tobias.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen, and thanks for having us. Tobias Lechtenfeld, I lead Tech for Net Zero. We are a network of clean tech startups and their investors. We're focused primarily on the Germany, Austria, Switzerland, so the DACH region, German-speaking part of Europe. But we have, of course, also a lot of partners across Europe, including Clean Tech for Europe, which many of you will know. What we try to bring together is essentially the next generation of industrials, kind of the scale-ups that we need for Europe to stay competitive, to kind of gain that strategic autonomy. The total value we try to aggregate of the members we have is about 100 approaching, is approximately 16 billion in terms of scale-ups, including their VC. So a voice to reckon with, I think, on a policy side, and the way we work is we essentially help government in Brussels, Berlin, but also other kind of constituents to basically design the instruments, both on the policy side, but especially on the finance side, to make sure we're aligning policy with functioning markets. So I leave it here and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. Don't go too far, because I think we'll start with you. I'm going to work backwards this time. So, well, basically, how do you think that the Act is going to address the needs of the SMEs and the scale-ups that you support, and what are their main bottlenecks?
Great. Yeah. So I think this is really key, right? So from a startup perspective, or when I'm a founder of a deep tech company that brings in a new breakthrough innovation, let's say in cement or in some other net zero vertical, first of all, I need demand for the green product. And this is being created. And I think this is really also where we think this is really a breakthrough legislation, that essentially we're creating quotas of local production for key industrial inputs. And I think that's really a positive thing in itself, if it leads to spurring kind of a growth in innovative products. So let's say in the case of cement, just to stay with that example, it should ideally help clean cement producers, new ones, existing ones, but especially the highly innovative ones that can really bring the cost down of net zero cement. The second, which I think is great, is reducing the barriers for manufacturing. Again, barriers are plentiful. I think anyone who's ever built a factory has a long list of frustrations that they can share. Here, I don't think we expect gigantic change. We think that can help a bit. perhaps, but because it's all done at a local level, at a regional level, and national level, we expect quite some dilution in reality in terms of how much faster things can go. We read somewhere there's an auto approval idea that after 18 months or so, things just get approved. They could be highly effective in some instances, but to be seen how that really plays out then in the final approved version. And then on de-risking investment, which I think is really the third lever proposed by the Commission, and kind of we totally agree with the idea. I think in reality, we're almost seeing the opposite. So here we're very critical, because when I look at just, for instance, the foreign direct investment rules, I'm not sure anyone has done sensitive economic modeling of these rules in reality, what that means, but we are afraid that actually we're going to lose much more than we gain through these rules. Because if we have, if we chop our foreign direct investments in half, then we're losing more than we gain. So I think that needs to be a little bit reconsidered and also just validated. Some of these things seem to be not really aligned with modern economic theory, but especially on the production side, we're very positive.
Thank you so much. Hugo, I'm going to come back to you in a second, but I just wonder if Imavera could respond to the point to Tobias's point about de-risking and the potential of losing actually much more than they could gain.
Yes, thank you indeed. Thanks for giving me the possibility to react. Very interesting remarks, very, very useful. Thanks for sharing that the demand creation is a positive signal, and it's true. This is the first, it's like the first time we intervene on the demand side. When it comes to the de-risking, I have to say I disagree a bit with you on the foreign direct investment, simply because it's not cutting in half, because as I mentioned, we have indeed, the idea may sound scary, but we are here targeting investment over 100 million coming from, let's say, players that come from countries that own 40% of the global share, global demand or production of this technology. So if you do a bit of maths, I think we did a bit of calculation. This is about the very large investment that in Europe per year amount to a dozen, less than between 10 and 12, and really coming from a very, very narrow set of players. So we have in mind certain large investment where we have seen situation that the damages on Europe have been higher than the advantages, and we really want to focus on this one. We fully recognize the benefit of foreign investment. We want to continue to encourage that as a source of economy, of wealth for Europe. This is fully recognized. We want the rate of foreign investment to increase. But for those specific investment, which comes attached with a lot of consequences and spillover, because they are large, a lot of innovation, we want to keep some of this spillover. We want to make sure that they stay in Europe. We have in mind some example of big investments in, for instance, I don't want to make names, but in the sector of batteries, technologies, and so on, where the negative implication and intended consequence for the territories were not ideal. And this, we feel that is a responsibility of the internal market. So it's indeed attaching some strings, but to a very niche, narrow. It's been calculated. We can come back, but again, you have to fulfill the 40% share of global production of these technologies, which is not something that if only a few producers fulfill that condition. I hope it clarifies. Otherwise, I'm happy to take it bilaterally via email or whatever. My contact details, can be shared with the audience.
Thank you, Imavera. Hugo.
Thank you. I had a reaction regarding the first criteria in the first intervention regarding demand. Maybe this is something I didn't plan on highlight, but the possibility we have maybe throughout, maybe after this event, of being perfectly interconnected between clusters in Europe to enable the detection of opportunities for businesses. This is something I would like to bring to reflection to everyone. Let's think like Europeans. The company we support, the CEOs we meet, can really benefit from these interconnections to more easily find European partners. So maybe to find demand regarding these evolutions we are discussing today, maybe this could go through somehow some kind of a acceleration through better interconnections between clusters, because there are markets that the CEOs we meet don't know about, maybe throughout Europe.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. And when it comes to specifically to the SMEs and the scale-ups in Cleantech Valley, for example, how do you see them being able to take advantage of the opportunities or of this act?
Well, I had the first reactions that you heard about on Monday, so I'm going to share I'm going to share them with everybody today. So first of all, maybe so I wasn't about to address the demand in the products, but okay. So regarding the accelerated permitting procedures, what we can say is that we have a duty to highlight this acceleration as a lever for competitiveness. So maybe we as clusters managers, we have to be perfectly well informed on how these evolutions are going to simplify things. We talked together about Airbnb UX design, so okay, this is a bit far-fetched, but still, simplifying administrative procedures this has a very big impact on how clusters can help new businesses to emerge or existing companies to develop in the strategic fields targeting by the IA. So because it reduces the back office hours required for these processes. So this will allow some, I think, European clusters to be on a more level playing field. You know, the principle is simple. The more complex the administrative tasks, the more human resources you need to process the file. So if you don't have an AI solution that does it for you, so therefore simplifying all the procedures is a very good thing for every actor in the field. And maybe for the Cleantech Valley, on another pillar, creation of an industrial production acceleration zones, this is an excellent idea, provided that the administrative complexity doesn't prevent us from benefiting from these accelerated zones, let's say in 2 to 4 years or even more. So we need them now. So using the terminology employed for these acceleration zones, the aim appears to be to create them. We hope this is some kind of a administrative creation and not a logistical one from scratch. We must leverage the most attractive zones today, whether it's for cement, steel, or other identified strategic sectors, as they are already established in economically organized zones around these sectors. And regarding this, maybe a word about the nuclear energy sector in France, because a few regions in France around the nuclear power plants are very well developed and have aggregated so many skills and companies that these are the most, I would say, fertile regions. As a famous French senator once said, the creation of energy, the production of energy, and specifically the nuclear electricity, we are the industry of the industry. So if you want to target the best potential acceleration zones, you have to target where the energy is produced, because it will reduce costs on a massive scale. And this is exactly what we are doing in France right now. Maybe you've seen the map and our ambition. I'm speaking for EDF, and with the approval of the government to create 3 new nuclear power plants of the next generation. And they are specifically, and this was a question asked by the public. So they are developed already next to existing sites. because all the infrastructures are here.
Okay, that's a great ad for nuclear. Thank you. Fabrizio, please.
Yeah, just to link with what Hugo said, because I think that he touched really the point. I mean, as Imavera said, the act is a kind of milestone at the European level, but as every and under I mean cluster perspective, the industrial acceleration areas are the most strategic for us. But as for the all the new initiative, the key elements is the execution. So let's see how the member states will implement and develop these industrial acceleration areas, because it's super important that, as you said, in their region, I mean, nuclear will be a super strategic point. But I would say that here, especially clusters should play a key role in these acceleration areas. I mean, I think that we as cluster we should be a kind of we should develop a kind of cross-border collaboration using these acceleration areas. I'm really curious to understand the timeline on these hypothetical industrial areas in each countries, but yes, I think that is important. I mean, the opportunity for the cluster is really to connect all the regional industrial ecosystem at national level, because I don't know in the other countries, but I would mention that also in the other regions is same situation. At regional level, it's difficult to have the entire value chain for specific topics such as clean tech, or I would say hydrogen, or other initiative related, for example, to industrial symbiosis. So these acceleration areas would play a key role in have this kind of link between all the value chains at national and European level. So again, in the principle, it's a super interesting kind of turning point at European level. It's now the floor is now of each member states in order to really execute this milestone in a good way, I would say. So super curious to understand these acceleration areas, and I think that cluster must be at the forefront for this initiative.
Absolutely. And actually, Imavera, if I may, just one last very question before you need to go. What would you say to Fabrizio and to others here today, other clusters that want to position themselves as candidates for these acceleration areas?
You mean in terms of advice, or what?
Yes, well, Fabrizio mentioned the timing, of course,
Yes.
and you can't predict what's going to happen necessarily in detail with the Parliament and the Council, but
Yeah.
a broad timeline as to how long you expect this to take.
Yeah.
But also, what are the opportunities for Lombardy, for example, for the Lombardy Clean Tech Cluster to become an acceleration area?
Yeah. Thank you. Indeed. So maybe just let me give you some background here, because I've also seen in the chat a question asking what is the difference with the Net Zero Industry Act valleys. Indeed, this is not a new concept, and it might sound that we keep on bringing back certain ideas. But what I wanted to say that at least this is our proposal at Commission. We want to go beyond. We want indeed that, for instance, there is an obligation for countries, for member states, to designate these areas, which I think in the Industrial Accelerator Act remains a voluntary instrument. So there are some member states that are more keen to operate via valleys, others that are less. Here for the time being, we ask member states to do it. But again, we have to see how it goes within the negotiations. So one thing could be that member states to take on board, to share this, and to agree with us on this. So perhaps your role could be to explain that these areas would be needed. It will be important. For instance, one element of novelty is the infrastructure, or this aggregated permit baseline, meaning that we are aware that there are certain environmental permitted that cannot be bundled, or of course, you cannot step those important procedures, but we are also aware that there are certain prerequisites that if they are already in place in an area,
it will encourage any investors to come, because you already know that there is the transport, the infrastructure, and then of course the environmental related assessment remains project specific. So this is something that is new. It's not a prerequisite, let's say, in the net zero valleys. So there is more advantages and benefit potentially for players, for small SMEs and others in the acceleration areas. But we need to make sure that this provision we are suggesting now, they survive in a way the Council and Parliament, because we may expect, we hear that when we say to the member states how to do their things, sometimes they are reluctant. They say it's not needed. I have a different, with merits, for example, don't want to question, every country has a different situation. But perhaps if in this process, which going back to the timing, so there is also European Council later this week on the 19th, and I think there will be some on the 20th actually. 19th, I don't remember, sorry. But the most important thing is that there will be the leaders, so head of state and government of the EU, I think will have a statement about this Accelerator Act, and they will push for an early agreement, ideally by the end of the year. We as Commission, we really hope that Parliament and Council as negotiator, they can prioritize this file and find an agreement by the end of the year. This means that if the law is adopted by end of the year or beginning next year, since it's a regulation, it enters into force 20 days after, so immediately after. It does need to be converted into a national decree, for instance, as is the case for the directives. So by next year, this member state, like the member states, will have already to start implementing the acceleration areas provision to designate this area, to identify the needs of the SMEs in the areas, to make sure that the energy needs are taken into account by the transmission system operator, for instance. We know that there might be some resistance in council to go this way. So perhaps in your activities, in your interaction with the local authorities, you can explain that while this sounds a bit intrusive or in a way an extra step for the authorities, is actually what is needed to help local clusters, local enterprises, but also to create a level playing field in Europe, because otherwise we will always have a situation where certain countries do digitalize, do provide benefit and faster permitting, and others don't. So if it comes from, a European internal market legislation should create a level playing field. So in this, I would say my plea to you is try to basically support us to explain that the acceleration areas can be more powerful and meaningful than the net zero industry valleys, and to try to have member states on board on these provisions.
Thank you, Imavera. Tobias, do you want to respond to that? And particularly to the, or rather, I want to extend the question. So we understand the importance in terms of the clusters becoming areas themselves, but what about the collaboration, the cross collaboration between those clusters and between the value chains?
Yeah, thank you, Karen. I think it's a really important point. So obviously we look at this from the perspective of a medium-sized company or scale-ups, and I think there's always a question of what's the transaction cost, what's the risks that I need to manage in such a project. So just very pragmatically, as a founder or as a company manager, how much also gunpowder do I have to develop these? So can I work for months in a pipeline without any promise or safe promise of revenue? And so I think it really depends on how in the end this is being fleshed out. If this is essentially, I guess what I'm trying to say is the most effective regulation is the one that auto-fulfills itself. So if you think of the IRA in the USA, it was a very simple tax credit. You invest, and automatically with the next tax declaration, which you need to do anyway, you get the tax credit. There was no regulator, no one was overseeing this. There was no additional layers of administration bureaucracy. And I think we have a tendency in Brussels to do a very complex top-down political objective to what we want to achieve. I think what I would love to see is a regulation that basically says, if you have a cluster, if you collaborate, write it in your tax records. If you get the check in the box, you'll immediately get your support. You'll get it afterwards, fine with a 1-year delay, but that's still better than 18 months of approval writing and applications, right? And so I think the number of the top-down approach is always very complicated. It creates layers and layers of bureaucracy, and it can counteract really as acceleration. But I would just want to be careful there and really encourage everyone in Brussels, from the Commission to the member states, to think of auto approvals much more and be less objective driven only. It needs to work from a company side. So if we look at the bottom line, if we look at how does the risk stack change, it changes a lot, and it is not always in our favor to do all these things. While in principle, the objectives are applaudable. So,
thank you, Hugo.
Yes, a reaction to what Tobias said. First of all, thank you for bringing up the matter of speed, the matter of simplicity. This is something I wanted to say earlier, but as Imavera Salon presented, and I thank her again for her presentation. Okay, we get that Europe needs to establish new rules because we are facing more than an economic war. China has doubled its exports to Europe in 10 years. So clearly we are facing many dangers. And therefore, I have an important question linked to what Tobias said, because especially in France, we are struggling and really grappling with this considerable difficulty. An important question. Okay, we must establish new rules, but what do we do to abandon old ones? So okay, you can create acceleration zones, but what do you sacrifice, or what do you sell to other complexity that have been brought up throughout the years regarding old regulations and old processes? This is a very difficult question, but creating new rules has to be linked to forgetting old ones.
So one in, one out principle.
This is a very difficult exercise.
Okay, thank you. Imavera, do you want to respond to Hugo and to Tobias? Should it be one in, one out?
Yes. So indeed, that's also, I think, part of the overall objective of this commission of simplification. And I think in the past months, we have seen with a number of omnibus proposals that have been put forward in all sectors, it's indeed an effort to simplify, to reduce, to make less burdensome the reporting. I mean, I personally cannot speak for the entire acquis of proposals that are. I work on one specific policy, but I do see that this is becoming also internally. I'm aware that's what sometimes duplicate, we create double, but I can tell you, even in the case of the accelerator, there were certain ideas about certain things that in the end were not picked up because it would have created extra layer and the duplication. Here, it's not what we are proposing, although in certain things sounds about duplicating, adding, it is not. It's actually either adding value where it's necessary because there is a failure of the existing system, or otherwise I wanted to go back to the colleague that mentioned before about indeed business being overwhelmed with procedures and why it's not just simple to do something and then exposed receive confirmation or like the support, the schemes, rather than waiting for everything. So two elements. One, it's an important characteristic that, once again, it's in our proposal, and I don't know 100%, I hope it will survive the negotiations, is that for all the made in Europe requirements, or like the made in Europe low carbon requirements that we have introduced in the context of the public procurement and support scheme, we are basing it on self-declaration. So basically, we are trusting the business, the enterprises, to self-declare that the materials that are being used in that specific construction project or automotive or car or buses is low carbon and is coming from Europe. Of course, they need to follow, let's say, the way of defining low carbon, of defining made in Europe that is in the law, but it's up to them to prove it's accepted and then expose the authorities, let's say, can require a check, but it's not a blocking element to bid. So it's based on self-declaration, or also we are not creating new reporting and new, let's say, infrastructure. I just give you one concrete example. For instance, we are talking in the case of lead market about products such as cement or steel that are construction products. These products are already heavily regulated under so-called construction product regulations, which come already with their paperwork, with their certificate of conformity and performance assessment. So we just say, as part of that reporting, you define also your low carbon. So we are trying not to create new template, not to new papers for the companies, but to use what already exists and what already do. Based on other like safety requirements of the product, for instance. And then another point I wanted to mention, because I think it was raised, is this concept of the tacit approval. So if you hear silence means consent, of course it is not for everything in the product. There are certain permitting procedure where you need to evaluate this, especially regarding to environmental assessment. These things, I mean, our colleagues from DG Environment were very, we cannot just overstep, but what we call it's intermediate step. So there are certain processes where it's not, let's say, putting at risk environmental assessment and so on, where we say for this intermediate step, I don't know, making a hole in a factory or like in the building or raising another, where it's like, intermediate to then make sure that the final project is in place, we have introduced the concept of tacit approval for the authorities. Once again, I don't know if this will be accepted as it is by the member states, but on our side, we want to give a signal to the authorities that, okay, we understand that the timelines is not what's sorted all, but in certain instances, if you know that if you don't reply, it's considered okay, then it might give perhaps an incentives to actually reply to the developers.
Thank you. Tobias, did you want to briefly react to that? And then I think we'll have to move on, sadly.
Yeah, no, I think it's really great to hear, Maria, what you're trying to achieve, and I think the complexity of what you're trying to chop down to, it couldn't be higher. So I think it's really an applaudable effort, the overall project, and in getting this act together. Of course, there's always deliberations. I think in cement, what we see so much is where governments, local governments especially, already trying to procure green cement, including from innovative companies, and then they often run into the very, very pragmatic issues of the new materials need to be certified, and then actually you cannot participate in public tenders. So why? Because of course industry incumbents are sitting on the approval boards and are blocking the access, and so in the end we see incredibly circular bureaucratic chains blocking innovation, and it's not anyone's individual fault, but I think we need much more deeper kind of weeding out the barriers, because it's not just at the top level. I think this is what we're seeing very clearly in value chains like cement, which could be, I think, perhaps one of the most benefiting winners of this overall regulation if we get it right. And if only it works there, I would say it's still a great win. We could have a net zero cement across the union. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I clearly we could all stay and discuss this all day, but unfortunately we do have to move on. So I'm now going to ask Nina, please, to take us through the usual funding opportunities. And thank you so much to all of you for your contributions. It's been fascinating. Thank you.
Many thanks to all of the speakers. Indeed, very interesting discussions that we hopefully continue after this webinar as well. Just to close, we want to highlight some interesting funding opportunities that might be relevant for you in the audience. First of all, the new call for the Erasmus for Young Entrepreneurs Local Partners is available. This call is under the Single Market Program, seeks to select intermediary organizations that will run the Erasmus for Young Entrepreneurs program locally. And the program itself supports cross-border exchanges between new and aspiring entrepreneurs and experienced host entrepreneurs in different participating countries. And the applicants to be the intermediary organizations, of course, need to have experience in supporting businesses and are required to comply with the requirements set in the call. You can have a look at it on the EU funding and tenders portal. Proposals must be submitted by the 21st of April, and the call has a total budget of 15 million. So if you're interested in becoming an intermediate organization for this Erasmus for Young Entrepreneurs program, have a look at the EU funding and tenders portal. The Innovation Fund supports large-scale, medium-scale, and small-scale projects for the general decarbonisation and funds projects that aim at the commercial deployment of innovative low-carbon technologies with the objective of bringing to the market industrial solutions to decarbonize Europe's economy. So very much in line with the discussion that we had today. Proposals here must be submitted by the 23rd of April. The topic ID, you have it here in the screen, and the link to the call in the chat. And there is also a call open. We were talking as well about infrastructures in Europe. It's called Pilot Access Schemes to Technology Infrastructures for European Startups, Scale-ups, and Innovative SMEs. Here, the proposals should contribute to a sound understanding of the specific need of industrial users for technology infrastructure services, for example, in the areas of advanced materials, clean energy, health, biotech. Then there should be concrete opportunities for the industry users for the development, testing, upscaling, and deployment of new technologies via the use of these technology infrastructures, as well as strengthen the innovation and technology development capacity by European SMEs, startups, and scale-ups via the infrastructures, and to enhance the attractiveness and effectiveness of the developed access schemes. Proposal deadline is the 21st of April. You have the topic ID here in the screen and the link in the chat. Since we will publish the slides on ECCP afterwards, you can also revisit this information and go to the calls. So thank you very much, and back to you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Nina. And again, many thanks to all of our speakers today. And I think our conversation clearly shows that the IAA has the potential to play a critical role in accelerating Europe's industrial transformation, but its success will very much depend on how it is implemented on the ground, and also on your contributions during the course of the decision-making process through the Parliament and the Council. Please do continue the conversation that we've just started on LinkedIn, on the Cluster Collaboration platform. You have all the details here on the screen. Thank you so much to the ECCP team for organising today's session. Thank you to all of us, to you for joining us. We will endeavour to answer all those questions. And as Imavera said, she will also be sharing her contact details and the slides that she used during today's presentation. So that remains for me to say goodbye, and I hope you all have a very productive day. Thank you.